Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into the absolute powerhouse of a city that is India's financial capital. We're going to trace the incredible, almost unbelievable journey of exactly how Mumbai evolved from a fragmented, muddy archipelago into the massive, unified megacity we know today. But before we get into the heavy engineering and politics, think about this for a second. Did you know that the land millions of people call home right now was once casually traded away as a royal wedding gift? I know, it sounds totally bizarre, but that single transaction literally altered global economics forever. So here is our roadmap for today. We'll start with the original 7 islands, look at the Portuguese arrival, unpack that crazy royal dowry, see how the islands were physically joined, examine the British era, and finally arrive at the birth of modern Mumbai. All right, let's jump right into part 1, the 7-island archipelago. Picture this. If you were standing there 1,000 years ago, there was no single city at all, just 7 completely distinct islands, separated by huge, swampy marshes and mudflats. These isolated pockets of land were inhabited by the indigenous Koli and Agri fishing tribes, and each of these separate villages essentially had their own distinct cultures and were ruled by various indigenous kings. It's so far removed from the concrete jungle of today. Because of its coastal location, this region constantly shifted hands. It was basically a historical game of musical chairs. We're talking King Ashoka's Mauryan Empire all the way back in the 3rd century BCE, then running through 1,000 years of various indigenous Hindu dynasties until the Delhi Sultanate took control in 1348 and eventually becoming part of the Gujarat Sultanate by 1398. Which brings us to part 2, Portuguese arrival and control. So the European chapter begins in 1508. That's when Portuguese Viceroy Francisco de Almeida sailed in. He was immediately struck by the amazing Arabian Sea harbor, and he called it Bombay, which literally translates to Good Bay. And you can guess what happened next, right? Over time, that Portuguese phrase naturally morphed into the name Bombay. But here's the thing. The Portuguese didn't actually conquer it through force. Geopolitics just kind of handed it to them. In 1534, Bahadur Shah, the Sultan of Gujarat, was terrified of an impending attack from the rapidly expanding Mughal Emperor Humayun. Out of sheer panic, he signed the Treaty of Bassein, surrendering the 7 islands to the Portuguese just to secure a military alliance. Once they settled in, the Portuguese got right to work. They actively promoted the spice trade and spread Christianity. They even heavily encouraged intermarriage to try and shift the local conservative culture. Beyond that, they laid down some serious foundational infrastructure, building Roman Catholic churches, roads, and massive stone forts like Bombay Castle, Banjur Fort, and Moth Fort. Now, on to part 3, the ultimate royal dowry. So, if the Portuguese were the ones building all these sturdy forts and churches, how on earth did the British wind up with the keys to the city? Well, the answer is wild. By 1661, the Portuguese were facing a massive existential threat from the Dutch over the global spice trade. They desperately needed a strong ally. So, Portuguese Princess Catherine of Braganza was married off to England's King Charles II. And as part of that 1661 marriage treaty, the 7 islands of Bombay were literally handed over to the British Crown as her wedding dowry. A whole city just given away. Now, these 2 European powers looked at the same exact islands and saw completely different things. The Portuguese had focused heavily on agriculture, religion, and spices. The British East India Company, though, they looked at the bay and saw an absolute commercial fortress. Their sole focus was port security, establishing a ruthless export monopoly, and building a strategic naval defense against both the Dutch and the Mughals. But here is the kicker. King Charles II really didn't grasp the gold mine he was sitting on. In 1668, he decided to lease the islands to the East India Company. The price? Just 10 gold pounds a year. He severely, ridiculously underestimated the future economic powerhouse he held in his hands. All right, part 4, joining the 7 islands. When the British set up shop, they brought new medical facilities with them, which drastically reduced local disease rates. The result of that, plus the new trading jobs, was an absolute population explosion. In just over a decade, the population skyrocketed from 10,000 in 1661 to an incredible 60,000 by 1675. People were flooding in. But there was a huge geographical problem. With trade booming, having 7 separated, easily flooded islands was a massive liability.
Boats were getting destroyed, so they launched the Hornby-Villard project. Spanning from 1782 to 1845, this was a mind-boggling engineering feat. Over 6 decades, they built massive causeways and literally filled the open sea with debris. They painstakingly stitched all 7 separate islands together to create one single unified landmass.
Moving into Part 5, the British era and exploitation. We have to be clear about this era. All that impressive British infrastructure had a distinct dual purpose. Take the famous 1853 railway. That wasn't built to make commuting easier for locals. It was built to rapidly drain raw materials from the interior for export. The Bombay City Improvement Trust, created after the devastating 1896 plague, built new settlements, sure, but they also evicted native artisans from their land overnight. Even the iconic Marine Drive was originally designed for the rapid transport of military troops and weapons during World War II. At the same time, the British Raj was determined to project its imperial power in stone. They constructed these incredibly grand colonial structures. You have iconic landmarks like Victoria Terminus, the beautiful Rajabai Clock Tower, the imposing Bombay High Court, and of course, the Gateway of India, which was literally built to welcome King George V. These are the imposing silhouettes that still define the city's skyline today. Let's look at Part 6, our final chapter, the birth of modern Mumbai. Fast forward to 1947. India finally gains independence, but the story doesn't stop there. Deep economic disparities sparked massive Marathi protests between 1956 and 1960. This widespread dissatisfaction actually forced the government to partition the old Bombay state into 2 new states, Maharashtra and Gujarat. And finally, in 1995, casting off its centuries-old colonial title, the city officially reclaimed its native Marathi name, Mumbai. Think about that incredible arc, from scattered, muddy fishing swamps to a geopolitical chess piece to a royal dowry, all the way to India's thriving financial capital. It's just an amazing legacy. The next time you look at the glittering modern skyscrapers of Mumbai, ask yourself, beneath all that concrete and steel, can you still see the hidden footprints of the 7 islands? Thanks so much for watching this explainer.